for a given angle alpha, where 0 is less than or equal to alpha is less than 360 degrees, it's known that sine of alpha equals negative 1/2, and cosine of alpha equals the square root of 3 over 2. And what is the exact value of alpha? Well, the first thing I think of when I look at this problem is, well, what's the ordered pair? And if you remember, this would be the square root of 3 over 2 and negative 1/2, because cosine is the x value and sine is the y value. And consequently, what that means is that we've got a quadrant where we've got a positive first value and a negative second value. And what that tells us is that we are going to be working in quadrant 4. So once we determine that, then what we want to know is what are these values, or what is the value. So sine of alpha equals negative 1/2. What we're asking ourselves is, where does sine equal negative 1/2 in the fourth quadrant? Well, it's a pi over 6 angle, and actually in the fourth quadrant it would be 11 pi over 6. Does that make sense when we think about cosine of the square root of 3 over 2? And again, we're still in the fourth quadrant, and cosine of 11 pi over 6 does equal the square root of 3 over 2. So this is going to be 11 pi over 6. Same kind of idea here on problem number 3. For a given angle alpha, where alpha is between 0 and 2 pi, but not including 2 pi, it's known that tangent of alpha equals negative square root of 3. What are the possible values? Well, once again, just a reminder, if we think about this, tangents all students take calculus. So in our first quadrant, all functions are positive, so we're not going to be working in the first quadrant. In the second quadrant, sine is positive, which means that tangent is negative. Third quadrant, tangent's positive, and then fourth quadrant, cosine's positive, which means that tangent's negative. So we want values here in quadrant 2 and in quadrant 4, where that's where tangent is negative. So if we think about it, tangent theta equals the square root of 3 is going to be a pi over 3, but we need a pi over 3 in the second quadrant, and that value is 2 pi over 3. And then we need a pi over 3 in the fourth quadrant, and that is 5 pi over 3. It pretty much goes back to knowing your unit circle. So maybe you need to dig out your unit circle in your folder and go through that again, especially tangent. I know some of you had trouble with the tangent function. Still, very similar kind of problem. It says for a given angle where 0 less than or equal to alpha less than 2 pi, it's known that cosine of alpha is greater than 0. Well, greater than 0 means positive, and tangent is less than 0, which is a negative value. Again, we think back to our quadrants here, and so in the first quadrant, all of our functions are positive, so it's not going to be an answer in the first quadrant. In the second quadrant, cosine, because this is all students take calculus, cosine is not positive, so it's not going to be this one, it's not going to be this one. Third quadrant, tangent's positive, so it's not going to be that one, because we say tangent of theta is less, or tangent of alpha is less than 0. But in the fourth quadrant, it is going to work for us here, because cosine will be positive in that quadrant, and tangent will be negative in that quadrant. So our answer to this one is quadrant 4. Again, unit circle. Do you need to go back and look at your unit circle? Do you need to refresh your memory on the hand if that was one of the techniques that you used? Remember to use your left hand. But the cosine of 5 pi over 3 is 1/2. And by the way, 5 pi over 3 is in quadrant 4, and cosine's positive in quadrant 4. the sine of 11 pi over 6 is, first of all, it's quadrant 4. So our answer is going to be negative, and then pi over 6 is going to give us 1/2. Letter C. What quadrant are we working in? Tangent of 5 pi over 6 is quadrant 2. And that means that our answer is going to be negative. And then 5 pi over 6, if you remember, and I need to make my space a little bit better here. But the way that we often remember with the tangent is square root of 3 over 3, because 3 plus 3 is 6. Well, cotangent of 4 pi over 3, think about the quadrant, and 4 pi over 3 is in quadrant 3. And cotangent as well as tangent, they're going to be positive, and no, you don't have to write the positive. But let's think about this here. It's the tangent of 4 pi over 3. If we think about that, tangent is the reciprocal of cotangent. So when we think about the tangent of 4 pi over 3, our value is square root of 3. But again, these are reciprocals. So in this particular problem here, we need to take the reciprocal. It's going to be 1 over the square root of 3. And some of you just memorized the function, and some of you rationalized it to come up with our answer here, which is the square root of 3, and 3 times 3 is 9, square root of 9 is 3. So we get the square root of 3 over 3. I know, a little bit more work than you probably wanted to, but you're trying to remember this to study it for the exam. It's the same kind of concept here when we get to letter E. The reciprocal of secant is cosine. So we're going to be figuring out the cosine of 5 pi over 4. By the way, that quadrant that we're working in is quadrant 3. And cosine in quadrant 3 is negative. Well, the cosine of 5 pi over 4 is square root of 2 over 2. But once again, we're talking about a reciprocal. So now we have to take the reciprocals. This is going to be 2 over the square root of 2. Again, some of you just memorized the value. But if you didn't memorize the value, what you're going to do is you're going to rationalize the denominator. We get 2 square root of 2. Down here in the bottom, square root of 2 times square root of 2 is square root of 4, which is still 2. And our values cancel out, which gives us negative square root of 2. Cosecant. Reciprocal function is sine. Before I get going too far along, this is in quadrant 2, and sine is going to be positive. And this one I don't have space to fit it right beside, so when we finish this here, 2 pi over 3, again, use your hand gesture if you need to. It's going to be square root of 3 over 2. But that's the sine value, and we need cosecant, so we're going to take the reciprocal of that, which is 2 over the square root of 3. And we want to get rid of the radical in the denominator, so we're going to multiply by the square root of 3 over the square root of 3. Fancy form of 1 gives us 2 square root of 3 over 3. And that is our answer here for the cosecant of 2 pi over 3.